All right, so moving on with plant growth and development, we're going to kind of do a review over photosynthesis. It's not going to be a quick review. The video may be a little bit faster than what we go through in class. I want to hit some things that we highlighted in biology and some things that we didn't go in as much depth with in biology. So again, overview of photosynthesis in short is going to be when plants absorb light and use it to separate hydrogen from water to ultimately create glucose. Okay, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. If you think back to biology, you take in water and you use a photon to split the water molecule, releasing the hydrogens to build a concentration gradient within a thylakoid, and then that hydrogen releases through an enzyme or protein called ATP synthase, which spins like a top to power the process of attaching ADP with a phosphate group to create ATP, which will then be used to make glucose. Okay. And of course, a byproduct of this is going to be oxygen. So hopefully, some of what I just said rings a bell. And you remember some of these things that we talked about in biology or ag bio, whichever one you took. So the plant cell is going to be, of course, very similar to animal cells. We talked about this in biology as well. Each cell is going to have similar organisms, such as a mitochondria, nucleus, ribosome, cell membrane. The endomembrane system is pretty similar. Both cells, of course, use ATP, um, and both cells are going to have that cell membrane. Even the animal cell or plant cell, rather, will have cell membrane. A lot of time that's forgotten because of the cell wall. The differences, though, are of course the cell wall and chloroplast. So plant cells have a cell wall and it is right outside the cell membrane. And of course, that cell wall is used for protection and support. And here, one of the bullet points, it says the cell wall acts much like a skeleton. So the cell wall is what gives plants their structure. Plants also have chloroplasts, which are the organelles that do photosynthesis. It's using the light energy that we refer to as a photon to power the removal of hydrogen from water, and ATP is going to be used to assemble a glucose molecule. Going kind of quick because all this is review, and albeit you may not have thought about this for a while. If you need to pause the video to take these notes, please feel free. So the important parts for chloroplasts, two main parts. You have the thylakoid and the stroma. So the thylakoids look like stacks of it's going to look like a pancake, a green pancake. All right, so this is where the water molecules are split and hydrogen is stored inside the thylakoid, and the thylakoid membrane is where we find the ATP synthase. So the stroma is going to be the empty space around the thylakoids, and this is where the actual glucose molecule is going to be assembled. So we did talk about this in cellular organelles, but again, it's been a long time, so you probably need to remind yourself about what a thylakoid is and what a stroma is. So, of course, thylakoids are going to store the hydrogen, and they're lined with a green pigment called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is going to absorb energy from the sun, the light, which is going to be a photon. Remember, it absorbs all light rays except green, and that is why we see green. It reflects green. The energy of the photons is going to be used to separate the hydrogen from oxygen in a water molecule. The hydrogen is stored inside the thylakoid, and the oxygen is going to be released as O2, as a byproduct, as a waste product. So thylakoids have ATP synthase on their outside or outer membrane. So the hydrogens will build this concentration gradient. And remember in biology, we talked about how the concentration gradient is what allows or gives the ability for certain cells and organisms to do work because nature doesn't like concentration gradients. And nature likes everything to be at equilibrium. So when there's a high concentration of hydrogen ions on the inside of the thylakoid, and a low concentration of hydrogen ions on the outside, naturally those hydrogen ions want to rush out. Okay. Well, their only way out of the thylakoid is through this protein ATP synthase, and that's their only way out. So as they rush through this structure, it spins like you spin a top, right? And every time it spins, it's producing ATP, which is going to be used to build glucose. All right, so thylakoids are found in stacks, and the stacks are going to be called grana. All right, so chloroplasts versus the mitochondria. So the thylakoids of chloroplasts have the same function as the inner membrane space of the mitochondria. They're going to store hydrogen so that it can turn ATP synthase to make ATP. However, the ATP in the chloroplast has only one purpose, and that is to power the assembly of glucose. The chloroplast ATP is not used for any other cellular purpose. So the ATP produced by mitochondria is going to be used for cellular processes. That's why it's called the powerhouse of the cell. The ATP from there drives everything. The ATP from the chloroplast is strictly set aside for making glucose. So photosynthesis is going to be composed of two different processes. You have the light reaction, the light independent reaction, the light dependent reaction. So the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. The light reaction occurs in the thylakoids, and this is what we've been talking about. Photon that is absorbed by the pigments, and this energy is going to be used to remove hydrogen from water. That hydrogen moves inside the thylakoid membrane, and then it rushes as the concentration gradient builds. It rushes out through ATP synthase, which is going to spin like a top. Um, and that ATP, it will be made from ADP in a phosphate group. And when happens in the chloroplast, it is called photophosphorylation. Right. So phosphorylation happens by light energy. So the ATP that is produced during the light reaction will be used to power the assembly of glucose in the Calvin cycle. So the hydrogen that powered ATP synthase in the light reaction is then added to the glucose molecule during the Calvin cycle. So remember electron carriers. Okay, we're getting ready to talk about NADP plus and NADPH. Okay, those hydrogen that are going to be attached will be carried by these electron carriers. So the Calvin cycle is going to be the process in which glucose is assembled from carbon dioxide and hydrogen. This process occurs in the stroma. Hydrogen used during the light reaction will be picked up by a molecule called NADP plus after it passes through ATP synthase. So NADP plus again is our electron carrier. NADP plus will pick up hydrogen and electrons. Once it picks these molecule or these substances up, it turns into NADPH. So NADPH has the hydrogen and electrons. NADP plus does not. These will be combined with carbon dioxide to produce glucose in the Calvin cycle. So carbon dioxide absorption, the Calvin cycle begins by absorbing carbon dioxide from the air. The carbon and oxygen molecules are separated and the oxygen is released. The carbon is then added to a molecule called RUBP. Okay, and this is a 5-carbon molecule that accepts the carbon from carbon dioxide, and this turns it into a 6-carbon molecule. This 6-carbon molecule will then quickly split into G3Ps, 2 of them to be precise. So a G3P is a 3-carbon molecule, right? A G3P is a precursor to all molecules produced by plants. Let me say that again because it's important. G3P is the precursor to all molecules that is produced by plants. Each of the 2 G3Ps that are formed have a specific job. One G3P will be used to reform RUBP so that it can continue to accept carbon from carbon dioxide. The other will be combined with another G3P to form glucose. G3Ps can also be used to make many other molecules produced by the plant cell. So it's a semi-conservative type process here. Right? Half is going to be reused again after every cycle, and the other half is going to be used to make glucose. And here is a pretty good little kind of circular chart here I found online. No, I did not make this, but it is good to kind of see the steps here, 1, 2, and 3, and as it goes and you follow the arrows of what's happening. I don't know what just happened there. All right, so steps to photosynthesis. Water is going to be absorbed by chloroplast of the cell, and that water molecule is going to be split into hydrogen and oxygen by a photon, and oxygen is going to be released as a waste product. The hydrogen is then moved inside the thylakoid, and this is going to begin to build a concentration gradient. Once the concentration gradient gets high enough, those hydrogen ions are going to rush through ATP synthase, spinning it, which is going to produce ATP from ADP in a phosphate group. NADP plus is going to pick up those hydrogens and electrons after they exit ATP synthase and become NADPH and head to the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is going to be absorbed by the chloroplast organelle, and the carbon atom is removed from oxygen, and oxygen is released. And that carbon atom is going to be combined with a 5-carbon molecule called RUBP. This creates a 6-carbon molecule. After it becomes a 6-carbon molecule, it quickly divides into 2 G3Ps. One G3P is going to be used to do the process again, then turn back into RUBP. And the other G3P will wait for another G3P to be combined to it to form glucose. And that G numbers are pound sign, and P should be a G3P. Sorry. The other G3P bonds with more G3Ps to reform RUBP. Last slide, applications in agriculture. So photosynthesis and respiration, which is what we'll talk about next, are key motivations behind many practices in crop production. So crops are going to need soil moisture in order to provide a source of hydrogen from water for ATP production. Crops also need sunlight in order to power the removal of this hydrogen from water molecules. Crops need proper soil aeration to provide oxygen to the roots so that they can acquire oxygen needed for cellular respiration, which was what we're going to talk about in the next presentation. Soils need to have adequate levels of phosphorus from fertilizers so that plant cells can have access to phosphates they need to produce ATP, because remember, ATP is produced from ADP and a phosphate group. And of course, this process of photosynthesis is important for the production of all type of plant crops. Okay? So hopefully this was just a quick little review, knocking some cobwebs off of the extensive learning we did in biology or ag bio over photosynthesis. If you have questions over any of these processes, questions about the molecules that are made and when they're made, please let me know. If not, complete the form that goes with this, and we'll continue on with cellular respiration soon. Thank you, and have a great day.